The other thing I want to leave you with is this. The death of Jesus, the cross of Jesus, is so fundamental. The resurrection, of course, is the keystone. But without death, there can be no resurrection. And it's important for us to realize that I believe that the Achilles heel of Islam, and I've always argued this, and I will continue to argue this because I think I have the argument here. The Achilles heel of Islam is the denial of the death of Jesus. And in my debates, I have always brought out not only the consensus, the wide consensus of New Testament scholarship, both liberal and conservative. One thing that all New Testament scholars and historians are agreed on, even the most radical of them, those of the Jesus Seminar, there's one thing they're all agreed on, and that is that Jesus died on the cross. That is one historical fact that E.P. Sanders himself said is beyond dispute. Not only do these scholars tell us that, the early writers of the New Testament all attest to this reality. The letters of Paul attest to it. The general epistles attest to it. The book of Revelation speaks of the Lamb who was slain. But we have extra-biblical writers like Suetonius, the Roman writer, Tacitus, the Jewish Talmud, Josephus, the Jewish historian. We have Greek writings, all of them attesting that there was a man by the name of Jesus who was known to be a wonder worker, who worked in the region of Palestine, and who had a following, and who was executed under our procurator, Pontius Pilate. They even name him Pontius Pilate. He was executed under his rule when a number of the leaders of the Jewish people handed him over for trial. We have incredible corroborating evidence from extra-biblical sources that tell us there was a historical Jesus, he had a following, he made an impact on both Jew and Gentile alike, and that he was known to be a worker of miracles and wonders, and that he was executed by Pontius Pilate under his command. If that is true, and all of history, the weight of the evidence is in that favor, then the passage in the Quran that says he was neither killed nor crucified is false. And like a deck of cards, the Quran drops. Because the Muslims say, if there's one error in the Quran, it's all disqualified. It's like a domino effect. You knock one, the whole thing comes down. Surah 4, 157 is the linchpin. The moment that is disproved, and Muslims now are beginning to waffle. This Muslim guy that I was debating, Shabir Ali, contrary to the history of traditional Islam, he is now telling us that Jesus was in fact crucified. But he didn't die there. He swooned. They thought he was dead, but he wasn't. And they took him down from the cross, laid him in the tomb. He revived in the cool of the tomb, managed to move away that rock from the mouth of the grave, snuck by the guards, and revealed himself to his disciples as alive. Now, folks, if you believe that, you might as well believe the Da Vinci Code. This is known as the Swoon Theory, the apparent death theory. It was put to death. It was actually advanced by people like Ramirez back in the 1600s. Schleiermacher tried to pass it off. He couldn't. But in 1835, a German critic by the name of David Friedrich Strauss, in his book Das Leben Jesu, The Life of Jesus, he was a radical critic. He had no invested interest in Christianity. He said in 1835 that the theory that Jesus swooned on the cross, that he was not really dead, he said, must be dismissed, summarily dismissed, because he said it does not adequately explain how Jesus went from a lowly carpenter to be worshipped as the exalted Lord of the church. How can that happen? Imagine for a minute, Jesus is on the cross, and the Romans give him the gall to drink, which we now know from other sources was a form of a narcotic to stun the pain. Jesus refuses it. And then Jesus cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And then he commits his spirit to the Father, and they break the legs of the thieves crucified with him. But the Romans, being dull-minded as they were, they thought he was dead, but he wasn't. Now think about that for a minute. The Romans were expert executioners. When they wanted to make sure a victim was dead, they made sure the victim was dead. They're not going to let him go scot-free. And so we are told in the Gospel of John that to ensure that this was the case, they pierced his side. Some critics say, well, John made that up because Matthew, Mark, and Luke don't mention the piercing of Jesus. Some radical, the one who wrote the Gospel of John just made that up. We now have evidence that in first century Judea, the Romans did pierce crucified victims. It's mentioned by a Roman writer by the name of Quintilian, who says that in some cases the Romans did pierce the victims to ensure death. So Jesus is taken down from the cross. His side has been pierced. Blood and water come forth from his heart. We now know that that is known as the pericardial fluid that envelops the heart. And he's taken down, put into the tomb. He awakes from his stupor. He moves a stone that takes about 10 men to roll over into the mouth of a grave. It was a huge round stone that they would bring down along a groove to cover the mouth of the grave. He manages with pierced hands and feet, and his body's been completely flogged. According to Isaiah's prophecy, he was so disfigured that he was not recognizable. His visage was so disfigured beyond comprehension that we couldn't even look at him. He was beaten to a pulp. He manages to move this stone, and he manages to tippy-toe across the guards. He runs off, meets his disciples, and Thomas says, "My Lord and my God," when they should have said, "My heavens, let's get this man to a hospital." Well, emaciated, bleeding, torn to pieces. That's the response you get when you see someone who's been through a car accident. Get this man to a hospital. You don't fall at your feet and say, "My Lord and my God, now I believe." And he says, "Because you've seen me, you believe. Blessed are those who don't see me, but yet believe." Is that the words of someone who's been battered and beaten and scourged? And how did Jesus go from being this lowly servant who is now the Lord, whom they call upon and whom they worship, the one that Paul says that the day is coming when every knee shall bow, every tongue shall confess, those in heaven, those on earth, those under the earth, they shall confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father, and that God has bestowed on him the ineffable name, Yahweh. He bears the divine name of God. He has universal sovereignty over the nations, over the universe. How do you go from a guy who swooned on the cross, half dead, to that? And that's what David Strauss says is inexplicable. You cannot sustain the view that Jesus swooned on the cross. These are all naturalistic explanations to avoid the empty tomb.